It has been 3 years since the Clone Wars began. Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi and Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker rescue Chancellor Palpatine from General Grievous, the commander of the droid armies, but Grievous escapes. Suspicions are raised within the Jedi Council concerning Chancellor Palpatine, and whom Anakin has formed a bond. Asked to spy on the Chancellor, and full of bitterness toward the Jedi Council, Anakin embraces the dark side. It's my Nerd World, and welcome to it. I'm your host, Jon Justice. Yes, we're doing a rewatch of Revenge of the Sith this week. I said I was going to. Did you not believe me? Also on the show, a couple of items we're going to get to. Not a lot of news since earlier in the week. If you missed those shows, be sure to go back and check them out. But an odd thing happened upon rewatching The Mandalorian I want to discuss. Also, an observation about The Last Jedi that I haven't heard anybody else talk about. It has to do with the cinematography. Taika Waititi's movie and the need for Star Wars, in my opinion, to make sure that they continue to do sagas. And then we will get into our rewatch of Revenge of the Sith, coming on the heels of that amazing 4-episode arc finale of the Clone Wars. I'm glad you're with the show again this week. It is brought to you by the EMBARK Science Fiction Space Opera Trilogy, written by Jon Justice, hey, that's me, and available at mynerdworld.net.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one.
There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
My Nerd World.
Just let it in.
I'm glad you're with the show again this week. I'm your host, Jon Justice, here on a Star Wars podcast, a part of the My Nerd World podcast. And I hope you are safe, and I hope you are happy, and I hope you are doing well during these difficult times. It does feel like, though, we're at least learning and going to be allowed to learn how to live with the world the way that it is. But we're here to talk about Star Wars, and that's what I'm going to do this week. And I'm really glad again that you're with the show. Not a lot of news, actually not any news, since Monday and May the 4th. But that doesn't mean there aren't Star Wars things to talk about. I'm basically going to run through a couple of items, just some thoughts I've had this week. Sort of my week in Star Wars that I want to share with you. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but just a couple of observations upon watching some Star Wars this week and sitting with some of the news that broke earlier in the week. And then we'll get into the rewatch of Revenge of the Sith. I got a bunch of details to share with you. A lot of information that's available on the commentary, but it might be new to you. Some behind-the-scenes information and 25 interesting facts about Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Arguably the fan favorite of the prequels. One of mine. I don't know if I'd say it's a favorite. Upon a rewatch, it really is an incredible film. These are all incredible films, and we'll get into this. Regardless of how people have received the prequels from. I've come to another level of appreciation for these movies, specifically for the space opera genre. Space operas have, because of Star Wars, become my favorite genre, and it's the genre that I write when sitting down to create the stories for EMBARK 1 through 3. And as a space opera, right, as the genre, and Star Wars itself is kind of a genre. Revenge of the Sith is an incredible film, and so again we'll get into that, and then we have some listener feedback we'll get to this week as well. So let's start off here, and again this is just kind of an observation, and I spent some time thinking about it, and I think I know the reason why this happened. I really did enjoy The Mandalorian, and I do enjoy The Mandalorian, but specifically, I really did enjoy The Mandalorian upon its first release. I watched every episode, I think, like 3 times when it first came out, but it wasn't Star Wars content that I found myself really leaning into with a desire to go and watch over and over again, right? And maybe that's an unfair measure. It's just sort of a personal thing for me, and I think probably for you, not all of you, but for some of you, it's the same thing. You know, it's kind of what Star Wars content do you lean in more often? Like I actually find myself watching Rebels perhaps more than Clone Wars, apart from that 4-story arc that just got laid out on Clone Wars, and I'll get into a little bit of that when we get into Revenge of the Sith. But when it comes to The Mandalorian, if you were to ask me, well, you know, is there a reason, John, why it didn't strike such a chord with you that you really were drawn into watching it over and over again? And I would probably say it's the lack of scope of the show. And I know the show wasn't designed to be like that, but The Mandalorian it's a very smaller in scale while still telling a larger story in a big universe. And I like the epic. I gravitate towards the epic. The Mandalorian really is more, and they hit the nail on the head. It really is more like that original Star Wars A New Hope film, which was only minimal because of the fact that George Lucas just didn't have the budget to make this grand epic story. And that obviously changed. I mean, that it started to open up and it got bigger with The Empire Strikes Back and bigger with Return of the Jedi. And then of course you get into the prequels. I mean, those are grand epics, and we'll talk about that with Revenge of the Sith coming up. And then you get into the sequel trilogy, and it's part of the reason why I enjoy the sequel trilogy so much. I love all 3 of those films, but again, if we're looking at those movies and I'm telling you which ones are my favorite, as I've said many times over the course of the past few weeks, The Rise of Skywalker is currently my favorite Star Wars movie, and there's an epic scale to that film that I just absolutely love. So many locations and so much diversity in terms of landscape and the scope of the battles. I just really, really dig it. I think J.J. Abrams did a fantastic job with The Force Awakens of giving us a year 2000-esque paced Star Wars movie, but still keeping it simple. Getting back to The Mandalorian, that's the thing that probably lacks for me as a viewer. It's that lack of scope. Something changed, though. With the announcement of Taika Waititi directing his own Star Wars film and co-writing that movie, I had already started to kind of work back through watching The Mandalorian over the course of the past month or so. Just wanting to, have some time to kill. What I want to, okay, I'll throw Mandalorian on, which is different for me than going, I want to go watch The Mandalorian. But I've been watching the last 4 or 5 episodes of it, and suddenly the show clicked with me. And the only thing that I can think of as to why the show clicked now with me more than it did last year when it debuted, it's because I think a part of that has to do with the fact that I was so hyped for The Rise of Skywalker that I was really treating The Mandalorian like it was the appetizer to the big meal that was coming up a few months later on. Going back and watching that show, it's not to say that I think it's better than when I first saw it, but I suddenly, for some reason, the show's really clicking with me right now. And as I began to watch the last 5 episodes, I found myself not wanting to turn it off. I found a new level of intrigue within the Mandalorian himself and the armor and the storytelling and the way that it was shot. It might also have something to do with the new Disney Plus series, The Gallery, where we get this behind-the-scenes look. The more you learn, the more you get to know these directors. I mean, because that's what Star Wars is. And not for everybody, right? For you listening to this show, I think you are gonna understand what I'm saying more so than your casual fan. But there's for a lot of us fans, we absorb so much of this that the more that we find out, for good and bad, the more that we find out about the process of making these movies, the more that it adds to all of it. And maybe I'm just speaking for myself. Maybe you listening aren't that way, but that's how I am. The more I learn about these behind-the-scenes stuff, the more I hear about these directors who I'm not familiar with, but I am now after that first gallery episode, the more I begin to appreciate what it is they're creating. And it's also the passion that you see in the other people and how much they're enjoying it. It really has raised my appreciation of The Mandalorian far higher than it was at the end of last year. And that makes me really happy because I love Star Wars so much, and I think there was a part of me when it first came out that wanted to feel that way, but I was so hyped with all the promotion around the Rise of Skywalker that I was like, yeah, this is good. This is a good holdover, but give me my Rey and give me my Kylo Ren and give me my Poe Dameron and my Finn. I want that. But now that we've got that, which I still love, and I still find myself wanting to watch it every single weekend, now I've got this new level of appreciation for The Mandalorian that I'm really glad that I do. And I wanted to share that with you this week. Didn't want to spend a ton of time on it. Curious how you feel, if there's been any sort of change in you, if you can relate to anything of what I'm saying. As always, you can email talkshownerd@gmail.com. Curious to get your thoughts. And this lends nicely into a comment that I wanted to make about Taika Waititi. I'm a big fan of Taika Waititi. And getting to know him a little bit more, watching the first Mandalorian gallery episode where they highlighted all the directors, certainly raised my level of appreciation for him. I also watched just recently on YouTube a TED Talk that he did, which is really interesting because he's such an eclectic individual and has such a dry sense of humor. It's not a typical TED Talk in where you're not getting a ton out of it, but the little nuggets you do get are golden. They're gold nuggets. And the one thing that I really appreciated that he said was, he said he didn't consider himself a filmmaker. He didn't really consider himself one of anything. And I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically said, no, I'm just a content creator. I just find different outlets that I can do my creativity and put it out into the world. Whether that be, he's big into art, whether that be art, or whether that be the sketch comedy, or whether that be a comedy, or whether that be a movie about Hitler, or whether that would be a Star Wars episode of The Mandalorian, or whether it's going to be a Star Wars movie, or whether it's going to be Thor. And that was something for me personally that I could totally relate to. Because and again, this is a personal thing for me, but that's kind of how I feel as of late. Being a talk show host is my full-time job. That's my bread and butter. That's where I'm going to always put all of my focused energy and attention on top of everything else that I do. But, I'm also a podcaster. And not just a Star Wars podcaster, but I also do, on occasion, my Depeche Mode podcast. And I also have started and am doing, again, sort of infrequently, but a self-publishing podcast. And I'm also now an author. And so if I can, if I reach a level where I'm diversifying my income in that way, I can very much see myself relating to the same way that Taika Waititi does, in that, well, yeah, I'm a talk show host, but I'm also an author, and I'm also a podcaster, and it really is it's going to be the way of the world moving forward, I think, for a lot of people. For the millennial generation, I think there's going to be less of, this is my one career path, especially for content creators, and more of, no, man, I'm going to have my hands in as many pots as I can get my hands into. I have no idea. And the guy that I write, my best friend Drew, and the guy that I do the show with the Justice and Drew show, he asked me, he's like, what do you think Taika Waititi's movie is going to be about? I'm like, I have no idea. I have no clue what this film is going to be about. I know there's a lot of speculation around Disney and Lucasfilm that they're going to get away from the saga movies. And actually, Drew made a really good point. In our discussion, I said, yeah, I'm hearing that they may do some single movies for a while before we get back to any saga films. And I made the comment, I said, that's great. I'm happy to get any Star Wars films that I can get my hands on. Maybe it'll be sort of a testing ground of if this particular film takes off and they can turn it into a saga. But, and I've said this many times on the podcast, and I'll say it again, Star Wars needs its mythology. Star Wars needs its fans speculating about the content. And you can't do that off one-off movies. We're not having and didn't have episode after episode, for as good or bad as it is, right? We didn't have hundreds of podcasts after the release of Rogue One, dissecting that film. We didn't have hundreds of podcasts, thousands of podcasts, dissecting Solo. We did for The Last Jedi. We have for The Rise of Skywalker, for good and bad. I prefer the dissecting of the mythology and the characters and the speculation, but that's what Star Wars thrives off of. It needs a saga. And what Drew said, what I thought was incredibly insightful and relevant. He's like, well, how many years did we get between the other sets of films? We had big gaps of time between the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. We had big gaps of time between the prequel trilogy and the sequel trilogy. And that may be what we're in for as fans. I hope the live-action TV shows end up filling the gap on that. I hope the live-action TV shows, if we get Ahsoka, whatever show whatever female-centric show that we were told we were going to get from that new writer, I don't have her name in front of me, so my apologies, the Cassian Andor show, the Obi-Wan Kenobi show. I hope that that live-action content ends up giving us as fans some stuff to chew on that we can speculate about. It sounds like, getting back to The Mandalorian, that we may get that in Season 2. Some of the speculation that we're hearing about what characters could be in there, what that could ultimately mean for the storytelling, how big is it going to get. I'm expecting, and this is what I'm personally hoping for as I wrap this particular conversation up, make a comment about The Last Jedi, and then we'll get into Revenge of the Sith. I'm hoping that The Mandalorian follows the same trajectory that the original trilogy did. And that is, Season 1 was your New Hope Season 1, where it's a little smaller in scope, very personal, still a space opera, but it's about the single individual, right? And going to just a handful of planets. We're going to get some space battles, but, it's mostly going to be kind of grounded. I'm hoping that when we get to Season 2, it opens up in the same way The Empire Strikes Back did. A little bit darker, a little bit larger in scope. And I think with that final episode and Moff Gideon with the Blacksaber, I think that's where they're heading. And then we know we're getting a Season 3. So then, obviously the natural progression would be going into a Return of the Jedi, right? Where we get that even larger in scope in Season 3. And to be honest, all three trilogies did a really, really good job of that, in my opinion. The prequels were always kind of big in scope, but if you look at sort of scale-wise, The Phantom Menace is sort of the smaller, more, it's not intimate, but it is a more akin to A New Hope, in that particular movie, comparatively speaking to the Attack of the Clones or Revenge of the Sith. Now, Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, to me, kind of deviate from that, because both of those movies do get big in scope. I mean, it's one of the things that I love so much about Attack of the Clones is just how epic that film actually is. But Star Wars needs to have something that we fans can go and chew on. And perhaps we'll be okay. If we've lasted 10 years so far in between these trilogies, then perhaps we'll be okay with all this ancillary material waiting for whatever that next saga is going to be. And that's where I can't help but wonder if that's where Rian Johnson comes in. Right? They haven't pitched off Rian Johnson's trilogy, right? They still say they're doing it. We've had this talk of other directors doing Star Wars films. We got Taika Waititi. We have the rumors of the guy that did Slight, and oh my gosh, the name escapes me right now. But the other Star Wars writer doing a film. So maybe it is going to be a while. When they say we're taking a break from the big saga movies, maybe it is going to be quite a few years, and maybe that's when Rian Johnson comes in to create that next trilogy, which I would be absolutely fine with, even though I know a lot of fans would be disappointed. But even some of the biggest detractors of The Last Jedi have often said that, no, man, I don't like what Rian did with the sequel trilogy. I'd be fine if he went and did his own set of movies. But maybe that's where Rian Johnson steps in. And because I always saw him, and I said this from the get-go, I always saw him as being sort of a creative element like a George Lucas. And I think if you get a Dave Filoni in tandem with a Rian Johnson creating a new saga that gives us that mythology to chew on. I think that is absolutely the recipe for something really, really special. All right, one more quick comment, just an observation. I'm really curious to see what you think about this, and then we'll get into the rewatch and a little bit of discussion about Revenge of the Sith. There was an article, ridiculous article, by the way, but there was an article that was put up on Cracked.com. Cracked used to be a lot better. Their podcast used to be amazing, and now they kind of suck. But you can still get some gems in there. This was not a gem. This was a really stupid article. It was this guy arguing against the use of a yellow filter when it comes to TV shows and movies. And the point that he was making was the yellow filter in, like, say, Breaking Bad. The yellow filter on the screen gets used to denote, you know, a place that's run down. And in the movie Extraction with Chris Hemsworth on Netflix, they're in Bangladesh and they put the yellow filter in there to make it seem scummy. And he felt this was wrong to do because it makes these places look awful. And I just completely disagreed with all of that because it's a movie. You're trying to convey a certain vibe and a feeling, and it's an artistic choice. It did get me thinking about something, though. This is not a complaint of The Last Jedi, just an observation. And I haven't heard anybody else talk about this. But Dan Mendel, who is the... Actually, hold on, let me check this. All right, I had him flip-flop. So Dan Mendel is the cinematographer for The Rise of Skywalker and for The Force Awakens. Steve Yedlin is the director of photography for The Last Jedi. Rian Johnson's films have a very distinct look. You hear people talk about J.J. Abrams, and his have a distinct look as well. It's because of the cinematographers. Okay. That being said, there is a muted tone to The Last Jedi that is non-existent in all the other Star Wars films, especially in the sequel trilogy when you compare how crisp and slick the cinematography is of The Force Awakens and The Rise of Skywalker. Right? Now, I really like this in The Last Jedi. I feel like the cinematography of Steve Yedlin and the sort of the more muted color palette suits that movie very well. But it is very different than any other Star Wars movie. And even The Rise of Skywalker is leaning into more of sort of JJ and Dan Mendel and Star Trek, the 2010 reboot and Into Darkness. There's a little bit more lens flare. It has a bit of flash to it, where The Force Awakens seemed to kind of be more of a combo of what we got in the original trilogy and sort of J.J. Abrams style. My point is this. I can't help but wonder if subconsciously people who didn't like The Last Jedi also had a hard time with, on a subconscious level, the fact that it just looked visually different. Now, I know a lot of people will point to the cinematography in that film and talk about how it's amazing and it's the best, and I'm certainly not going to argue with that. I think it's an absolutely gorgeous film. But there is no denying that if you put up screenshots of any of the characters from The Force Awakens or The Rise of Skywalker next to a frame of any of the characters from The Last Jedi, you can definitely see the difference. It's very much muted. And I remember going into The Last Jedi, and this was kind of confirmed when we first saw the first footage and the teaser trailers, because you can definitely see it in Rian Johnson's other films. Looper looks the same way, because it's the same cinematographer. Looper looks the same way. Brick looks the same way. The Brothers Bloom looks the same way. And I was very curious how that was going to translate to a Star Wars movie, but I can't help but wonder if for a lot of fans, they don't think it feels like, or it is like, a Star Wars movie, and on a subconscious level, it's because of just how tonally different it is. Just wanted to toss that out there as an observation. I could be 100% wrong. I just thought it was interesting, something that I'd thought about since the movie got released, and wanted to share it with you guys. What do you think? Do you think the cinematography of The Last Jedi hurt it or helped it? Do you think on a subconscious level it had any sort of impact on individuals who didn't like the film? And this is not, I am not looking for all your complaints about The Last Jedi. Okay, I no, please no. I know a lot of people hate it, and that's fine. You don't have to like it. You're entitled to your opinion. I just am referring to the cinematography of the film. Hopefully you can adhere to that. Leave a comment on YouTube or drop me an email at TalkShowNerd@gmail.com.
Something inside me has always been there. But now it's awake. And I need help.
Revenge of the Sith broke several box office records during its opening week and went on to earn over $868 million worldwide, making it the second highest grossing Star Wars franchise at the time. It was the highest grossing U.S. film and the second highest grossing film worldwide back in 2005. The film also holds the record for the highest opening day gross on a Thursday, making $50 million. You know, the prequel trilogy is really is unique. Especially when you end the arc of Anakin Skywalker to becoming Darth Vader, and how here you have a three movie arc, right? And it actually ends on a hopeful down note. I was thinking about that when heading into the show, and how unique Revenge of the Sith really is, in that you're watching an aimed for kids train wreck happening. This, it would be interesting if way down the line, and I don't even know if this is appropriate. I'm just throwing it out there for the sake of argument. It would be really interesting to see somebody else's more adult vision of the downfall of Anakin Skywalker, because you could really take it to dark places. The actor that plays the protagonist in the movie Chronicle, he also played Osborn in the Andrew Garfield, The Amazing Spider-Man. I always thought that his portrayal of a young teenager who ends up getting superpowers and ends up convincing himself that he's basically an apex predator, was like his turn in Chronicle. I always thought, man, if they had done Anakin Skywalker that way, that would have been intense. But again, we're talking about a series of films that at the end of the day are meant for children. And I thought George Lucas did a really good job of balancing out the serious nature of what Anakin was going through and his downfall in Revenge of the Sith with the fact that we are still talking about a children's movie. He didn't hold back at the end on Mustafar by any stretch. And, certainly the implication, we know what happens when it comes to Anakin showing up in the council with the younglings. I mean, that's dark stuff. And I think that George Lucas handled it absolutely brilliantly. It really is a special movie. And it really is, the prequels are really special films in what George Lucas told. And I feel like on a longer timeline, and we're getting there, there's going to be a better appreciation for what those films offer. Certainly in terms of space operas, man, it doesn't get much better than that. And I know, look, I love the original trilogy, and the original trilogy is better than the prequel trilogy in terms of just the movies themselves. I mean, without that, we wouldn't be having this podcast. But be that as it may, with what George Lucas was able to do, even with the limitations of technology and the infancy of CGI, is nothing short of incredible. If my EMBARK trilogy ever gets, if I'm ever blessed enough to have it become a live-action TV show or a movie, may it be as grand in scope. Please, that would be absolutely amazing. All right, let's get into some of the details of Revenge of the Sith. So, Lucas stated that he conceived the Star Wars saga's story in the form of a plot outline back in 1973. However, he later clarified that at the time of the saga's conception, he had not fully realized the details, only major plot points. The film's climactic duel has its basis in Return of the Jedi, the novelization, in which Obi-Wan recounts his battle with Anakin that ended with the latter falling into a molten pit. And I remember, that was, as a fan, I remember thinking, we better get our lava, man. That's what we were told. That's what we're waiting for. We better get our lava. Lucas began working on the screenplay for Episode 3 before the previous film, Attack of the Clones, was released. He proposed to concept artists that the film would open with a montage of 7 battles on 7 planets. The Secret History of Star Wars, the Michael Kaminsky surmises that Lucas found flaws with Anakin's fall to the dark side and radically reorganized the plot. For example, instead of the film opening with a montage of Clone Wars battles, Lucas decided to focus on Anakin, ending the first act with him killing Count Dooku, an action that signals his turn to the dark side. And of course, we ended up getting that Clone Wars montage in the middle of Order 66. Apparently, by the way, and I haven't found it yet, somebody has done a supercut of the final 4 episodes of Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, along with deleted scenes. I'm desperate to see that. I want to see that so bad. Since Lucas refocused the film on Anakin, he had to sacrifice certain plot points relating to Attack of the Clones. Lucas had previously promised fans that he would explain the mystery behind the erasure of the planet Kamino from the Jedi archives. However, he abandoned that plot thread in order to devote more time to Anakin's story, leaving the matter unresolved in the film. He had also originally planned to include even more ties to the original trilogy. And it's interesting because that was one of the complaints that I had coming out of Revenge of the Sith, is that I wanted some clarification on a couple of things. I wanted more clarification on Qui-Gon Jinn and Force Ghosts, and was a little bit disappointed that we didn't get that at the end of the movie. He wrote early drafts of the script in which a 10-year-old Han Solo appeared on Kashyyyk, but the role was never cast or shot. He also wrote a scene in which Palpatine reveals to Anakin that he created him from midi-chlorians and thus is his father, which is a clear parallel to Vader's revelation to Luke in The Empire Strikes Back, but Lucas ejected that scene as well. So that's not canon. I kind of want it to be, though, man. I kind of want it to be, because it really does. And I know a lot of people speculate, and I know there was a comic book that was out there that alluded to that, but that was also just a vision. It was never confirmed to be canon, but I love the idea of that somehow becoming canon, because I love how it ties into the Rise of Skywalker and what Palpatine did with Snoke and Rey being his granddaughter. I just think that, that's kind of my headcanon in this whole thing. And see, that's also why I didn't mind Palpatine coming back at the end. I didn't really hear a lot of people complaining about that in The Rise of Skywalker, but I've seen some videos, some clickbait videos on YouTube that were alluding to that. But I love the fact that Palpatine came back at the end. It makes all the sense in the world. You start off the sequel trilogy and you kind of get, who's this Snoke guy? And then you find, oh man, it was Palpatine all along. And we started this whole thing with Palpatine. All right. Let's see. Another planned scene by Lucas that was written during the early development of the film was a conversation between Master Yoda and a ghostly Qui-Gon Jinn, with Liam Neeson reprising his role. The scene was never filmed, and Neeson was never recorded, although the scene was present in the film's novelization. After principal photography was complete in 2003, Lucas made even more changes to Anakin's character, rewriting the entire turn sequence. Lucas accomplished this rewrite through editing the principal footage and filming scenes during pickups in London. In the previous versions, Anakin had a myriad of reasons for turning to the dark side, one of which was his sincere belief that the Jedi were plotting to take over the Republic. Although this is still intact in the finished film, by revising and refilming many scenes, Lucas emphasized Anakin's desire to save Padme from death, which to me was a much better call. Thus, in the version that made it into the theaters, Anakin's fall to the dark side primarily was to go and save Padme. Hayden Christensen, this is pretty well known, was asked to bulk up physically to show maturity that had taken place between the two films. Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor began rehearsing their climactic saber duel long before Lucas shot it. They trained extensively with the stunt coordinator, Nick Gillard, to memorize and perform their duel together. As the previous prequel film, McGregor and Christensen performed their own lightsaber fighting scenes without the use of stunt doubles. The speed at which Vader and Obi-Wan engage in the duel is mostly the speed at which it was filmed, although there are instances where single frames were removed to increase the velocity of particular strikes. Revenge of the Sith eventually became the first Star Wars film in which Anakin Skywalker and the suited Darth Vader were played by the same actor in the same film. In 2004, Gary Oldman was originally approached to provide the voice of General Grievous. However, complications arose during contract negotiations after Oldman learned the film was to be made outside of the Screen Actors Guild, of which he is a member. He backed out of the role rather than violate his own union rules. Matthew Wood, who voiced Grievous, disputed this story at Celebration 3, held in Indianapolis. According to him, Oldman is a friend of producer Rick McCallum and thus recorded an audition as a favor to him but was not chosen. Wood, who was also supervising as a sound editor, was in charge of the auditions and submitted his audition anonymously in the midst of 30 others under the initials AS for Alan Smithy, which is an old Hollywood joke. Days later, he received a phone call asking for the full name to the initials AS. I had this, by the way, a copy of the film leaked, right, onto peer-to-peer file-sharing services just hours after opening in theaters. The film was time-stamped work print, and it suggested it may have come from within the industry rather than someone who had videotaped an advanced screening. It was a pretty pristine copy for a bootleg. I had the copy of it. 8 people were later charged with copyright infringement and distributing material illegally. Documents filed by the LA District Attorney allege the copy was taken from an unnamed California post-production office by an employee who later pled guilty to his charges. The illegal copy was passed among 7 people until reaching an 8th party who also pleaded guilty to uploading it to an unnamed peer-to-peer service. Rotten Tomatoes. The film has an approval rating of 80%, an average rating of 7.28 out of 10. I mean, of the prequels, it's the best. It was the best received. A video game, I love this game, by the way. A video game based on the film was released on May 5th of 2005, 2 weeks before the film. The game did follow the film's storyline for the most part, integrating scenes from the film. However, many sections of the game featured scenes cut from the film or entirely new sequences for the game. The style of the game was mostly lightsaber combat and fighting as Obi-Wan and Anakin. It was also a form of multiplayer mode, which included both versus and cooperative. In the first mode, 2 players fight with the characters of their choice against each other in the lightsaber duel of the death. In the latter mode, 2 players team up to combat increasingly difficult waves of enemies. One more quick point, and I'm actually going to reach behind me and grab this. And I keep this out. Although it's been sitting on top of my Blu-ray collection, it's dusty. The soundtrack to Revenge of the Sith. And I remember getting this, and I remember how excited I was, and I have it in my hand right now, seeing the ARC 170 starfighters and the glowing thrusters of the engines. It reminded me of X-Wings. I just thought that was so rad. This particular Revenge of the Sith original motion picture soundtrack, it came... and it comes with a musical journey. And what this is it's a DVD. And it is one of the most incredible non-film Star Wars things that I have next to the documentaries. If you haven't ever gotten your hands on this, or if you've never watched this, and now I opened it up and I've screwed it all up because it's one of these old CD packs, where you get 2 discs on one on each side, and I screwed it up. If you're in a record store or you see it online, if you can purchase this particular disc, I would very much encourage you to do so. This musical journey, it takes you through the entire saga using clips of the films, and it's all music, and it is so much fun to watch. And what was so exciting about it at the time when it came out was the fact that when you get to Revenge of the Sith and the music, it actually had all these clips that hadn't been seen yet. It has a bunch of clips in this several minute long sort of promo using the movie from Revenge of the Sith to Revenge of the Sith. And I remember getting it before the movie came out, and I was just blown away. Because we all clamor for those, for those trailers. And here they had released this amazing disc DVD that was giving us footage we hadn't seen yet. And it goes through every single film with different tracks from the films, and they pick one particular song and they play footage over it. It really is incredible. And again, I keep it out because I revisit it so often. In fact, I may even watch it tonight. Again, look for it, and you got to find the copy of the Revenge of the Sith that has the musical journey on it. It is well worth the money if you can find it used somewhere. All right, let's get into some facts from Revenge of the Sith before we dive into listener feedback this week. Let's see. The volcanic world of Mustafar was designed to look like George Lucas's vision of hell. The images of the volcanic eruption on Mustafar was real footage of Mount Etna in Italy, which was erupting at the same time of production. The original cut of the film ran nearly 4 hours. The opening battle and Palpatine rescue alone ran over an hour. Oh, I'd love to see that. In the battle scene with Count Dooku, an imprisoned Palpatine originally had more dialogue, which he was to shout at Anakin. One of the lines, again, pertained to Attack of the Clones, in which Palpatine exposed Dooku as paying the Tusken Raiders to kidnap and torture and kill Shmi Skywalker. So we talked about this in a previous episode when we were rewatching Attack of the Clones. The Wookiee costumes from the film sport a new arterial system that pumped ice-cold water to help cool down the actors while wearing a suit. Liam Neeson said that he recorded a cameo as Qui-Gon Jinn, which was to feature the scene with Yoda, further explaining of the Jedi communicating beyond the grave. But as we mentioned before, that did not happen. The scene does not appear in the deleted scene section of the DVD either. However, an unfinished version was included on the Blu-ray release box set. The subtitle Revenge of the Sith is a play on the working subtitle for Return of the Jedi, Revenge of the Jedi. That was abandoned because Lucas determined that Revenge was not suitable for a Jedi to use. The film's final shot is meant to mirror the famous shot of Luke Skywalker in A New Hope. Not a huge surprise there. The opening scene when the second Separatist ship is destroyed, a piece of debris flies into the Clone Star Destroyer that shot it. That piece of debris is a kitchen sink. It was put there by ILM as a joke from someone saying we're throwing everything in the sequence but the kitchen sink. One of the early concepts for General Grievous was a small child sitting on a floating chair guarded by 2 IG-88 droids. George Lucas rejected this look as a child would not have been taken seriously as the deadliest hand-to-hand fighter scene in the galaxy. Yeah, it's in the concept art. The script and action figures identify Anakin and Obi-Wan as using call signs Red 5 and Red Leader, respectively, during the opening battle. Of course, Red 5 was the call sign for Luke Skywalker during the Death Star battle in A New Hope. Red Leader was the call sign of Wedge Antilles during the battle at the end of Return of the Jedi, of which Ewan McGregor's uncle, Dennis Lawson, played Wedge. Let's see here. In 2007, Dr. Eric Bouy, a psychiatrist in France, co-wrote a study that diagnosed Anakin Skywalker as having a borderline personality disorder. When the authors reported their findings at the annual meeting of the American Psychiatric Association, they stated that Skywalker fit the diagnosis criteria: difficulty controlling anger, stress-related breaks with reality, impulsivity, obsession and abandonment, and a pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships characterized by an altering between extremes of ideation and devaluation. Okay. For some shots during the birth scene, the infant Luke and Leia were portrayed by an animatronic puppet. As the puppet was operated by Ewan McGregor, the cast jokingly referred to it as Foamy Wan Kenobi. Ewan McGregor apparently asked if he could play one of the Emperor's red-robed Imperial guards, however, it's not known whether or not he did. All the shots of C-3PO had the entire green screen set reflecting on his shiny gold armor, so digital effects artists in post-production had to digitally repaint C-3PO's armor frame by frame to remove traces of it from the set. The scene of Vader and Obi-Wan using Force push on each other and knocking each other back was originally had a force field graphic effect added, but George was not satisfied with its conclusion, and thus the final shot did not have this effect added. Can I add, by the way, that the shot in the middle of the duel between Kylo Ren and Rey on the Death Star 2 among the water and the wreckage, where they force stall their lightsabers and their lightsabers actually like trace back, is so rad. I love every single minute of that. Apart from providing the voice of R2-D2 and the heavy breathing of Darth Vader, which he has done since Star Wars A New Hope, Ben Burtt provided the voices for every battle droid, super battle droid, and buzz droid in Revenge of the Sith. After the opening battle, as the transport lands on the Senate building in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, the Millennium Falcon can be seen landing. in the expanded universe Star Wars story outside the movies. The YT-1300 has been confirmed as the Millennium Falcon, then named the Stellar Envoy, long before Han Solo owned it. Stellar Envoy. Envoy, have you read EMBARK? Just going to leave that out there. Just going to let that sit there. Stellar Envoy, if you've read EMBARK. By the way, this caused quite a bit of controversy when the Solo movie came out because it's allegedly canon, right? That's the Millennium Falcon in Revenge of the Sith, but it doesn't look like the Millennium Falcon that we see in Solo, which happens later on. But most casual fans aren't aware of that. The Darth Vader mask for the film was rebuilt from scratch using a new digital design to computer lathe the base master from which molds were made to cast the on-screen costume masks. The resulting masks are, for the first time in Star Wars history, truly symmetrical. And again, I mentioned this on last week's episode. It's one of the problems that I had. I really think they should have stuck with the other helmet that wasn't as symmetrical. The opening shot of the film lasts 76 seconds after the disappearance of the opening crawl, the longest of any Star Wars film. Lastly, the process of applying chrome to rubber was developed during production, and that allowed lightsaber hilts to be made of rubber and used in stunts without hurting the actors. And that is your rewatch and look back of Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
And that would be you, because you write in TalkShowNerd@gmail.com and you leave comments on YouTube, and then I read them back on the show. Just got a few of them this week, right? There's a lot going on in the world, I understand. First off comes from longtime friend of the show, Betty. Enjoyed your May the 4th episode. Love Taika, and I'm thrilled with the news of him making a movie. Had you mentioned the gallery on Disney Plus? I just saw it today, so if you had mentioned it before, I might not have realized that was it. The interview John had with the directors was great. Hearing Dave talk about the call from the Lucas group was so good. It was fantastic. We've got some real live genius people at that table. As John said, the first question to everyone was, do you love Star Wars? Makes you feel good to see how much they all care about what they're doing. And again, that goes right back to the beginning of this episode and how much I've just grown to appreciate The Mandalorian. Friend of the show. You're all friends of the show. Anfasuvi. Happy Star Wars Day to you and yours, John. The official announcement of Taika Waititi, Christy Wilson Cairns, and Leslie Headlands joining the makers of the theatrical releases and Disney Plus series all sounds good to me. It does to me, Aunt. Thank you. Brennan, friend of the show. Hey, John, you said before that you had to turn away from certain voices of the online Star Wars discourse. This is true. As opinions on the films are so varied, at what point are a person's opinions too difficult for you to take? I ask because I often find myself in the same boat. Look, that's a personal decision, but I know for me, the lack of the use of "in my opinion." When I hear from commentators out there who simply take what they say as being the only truth, I just can't handle it. Now, there's a lot of shows that I stopped listening to just because I just don't like the negativity, even if they do say it's their opinion. But so often I find so many hosts out there who will talk about, for example, The Last Jedi and how it's a horrible, awful film, and nobody and anybody who doesn't think that way is wrong. It's fundamentally a flawed film. I just know that's your opinion because art is subjective. So that's what it comes down to. I'm fine with constructive criticism. All these movies can be picked apart. I saw, oh my gosh, who was it? Oh, it was Frosty Weintraub. Frosty from Collider. I don't particularly. Anyway, I saw him. He posted a tweet, and it was about C-3PO in relation to the Rise of Skywalker, Anakin Skywalker creating him in A New Hope, and something about his inability to read the Sith language and how it shows how stupid the Rise of Skywalker is. And that wasn't exactly it, but it was something along those lines and equally as ridiculous. And I tweeted and then I deleted it because it just wasn't worth it. But my point was, it's like this. It just proves that the Rise of Skywalker makes no sense. I'm like, Star Wars doesn't make any sense It doesn't. None of it makes any sense. But it doesn't matter. For me, it doesn't matter, right? How is it an X-Wing fighter can just lift off out of the, just take off? Wait, we didn't, when A New Hope came out, when I was a kid, and at the end of that film, the X-Wing just lifts off the hangar floor on Yavin and flies out. I didn't care. That's a cool looking spaceship. So, Brendan, it really comes back. It really comes down to, for me, if there's sort of a consistency of listening to a show or a commentator, and I'm just not enjoying listening to it, I just turn it off. And oftentimes it revolves around the lack of saying, in my opinion, and the lack of acknowledgement of, if you feel differently, that's cool. Right? Look, if you listen to the show and you can't stand, The Rise of Skywalker, and you think that, one of the reasons is because of how Ben Solo was treated, look, I get it. I absolutely get it. I feel differently, but I get it. I can understand why you were invested in that character and why you wanted to see him and you think he deserved to live. I would never say that anybody's opinion on that matter was wrong, even though I may have a different one. All right, let's see. One more here. Miranda Alicia. Well, there's two more here, but J.O.B. asked, who are the 5 actors and actresses you'd like to see in a Star Wars movie? And J.O.B. says, friend of the show, says this. Peter Dinklage as a Jedi. Idris Elba as a Jedi. I'm down with that. Jim Rash as a protocol droid. The Dean from the Community. Lena Headey, maybe a Sith or a bounty hunter. Viola Davis as a Jedi or Chancellor. Those are all great picks, J.O.B. Next week, I will give you a definitive list, because there are a lot of people that I have wanted to see play Star Wars characters, but I'm going to save that for next week's show because I think I could really have some fun with it, and we'll do it inside the actual show content and not listener feedback. And lastly today, Miranda, friend of the show, says this. I sincerely think it's time the fandom should start treating one another the way they would want to treat Baby Yoda. Start forgiving each other. Like they would forgive Ben Solo and Anakin, and respect one another the way that they would respect Luke and Leia Skywalker, Han Solo and Obi-Wan Kenobi. I'm just saying. I'm not going to name names on who's doing what, and I'm not going to point fingers. I know exactly what you're talking about. And on who's doing what, but for real, can you imagine how better we would be as a fandom if we treated and we talked to one another the exact same way as if the characters were our friends in the real world, and we had more compassion and tolerance for one another, if we learned to be more like our favorite when they are at their best? Just a thought. Miranda, I absolutely agree, and I'm going to add to that one little I'm going to add to that something. This situation that we're in the country right now and on the planet, it's unique and different, something that I never expected we go through in our lifetime. And maybe it's just maybe, right? And this is of no disrespect to the tragedy that's taking place on a daily basis around the planet. But maybe at the end of this, there'll be some good that comes out of it. I certainly pray that's the case. Because I agree. We could all do better as fans. And maybe this absence of being able to go to the movies will have somewhat of a seismic shift in the way the fandom treats each other. I don't know, but I really do hope that is the case. All right, and that wraps up the show for this week. Hey, look, before I go, a quick plug for EMBARK, The Vanishing War. The war for peace is about to begin. Having faced a stunning defeat at the hands of the evil Supreme Commander Sin Argum, longtime friends and leaders of a brave resistance, Taft, Katha, Ven, and Jabet must prepare for the inevitable attack on their homeworld, while the ruthless and powerful D-Corp amasses the largest military fleet in human history. A lone pilot arrives with vital information for the Raider Alliance on Zima. Escaping Earth and starting a new life in a far-off solar system was just the beginning. Conflict is on the horizon, and only Taft, Katha, and their ragtag group of freedom fighters, armed with the truth, can stop it. EMBARK, The Vanishing War marks the epic conclusion to the opening trilogy in the EMBARK series by Jon Justice. Lo Judice, hey, that's me. I'll tell you what, one of the biggest thrills that I've had so far in writing these stories, so great. So, my son Kyle, 13 years old, avid reader. He's currently reading The Vanishing War. He loves Lego, just adores Lego, and he makes all the little tiny versions of all the Star Wars ships. You know, the ones that you get like in the Advent calendar or in the bags at the at Target or at your toy store, right? I have some 3D printed ships from EMBARK that sit next to me. And he came and grabbed my hero ship, the main ship of the saga, the Anniversary, this freighter. My design, description, and then brought to life via the artistic work of Tom Edwards, who does my cover artist, and that ship is on the cover of both books 1 and 3. And he ended up creating a little mini version like he does the Star Wars toys. Man, it was so cool to see my 13-year-old son getting into the story and wanting to create T-crafts. And there's a new character that gets introduced in the story. And I don't want to spoil anything for anybody that's going to read it. You'll know who it is, certainly when you get to the end of the book, and you'll know what's coming later this year. And he's so excited for what I have planned for this particular character. Look, if I never sold any books, that made it absolutely all worth it. So cool. Just, man. I mean, that to me is the closest that I'll ever get to like being George Lucas. I mean that. You know, to have my son, and he's my son, and of course but to have him get so engrossed into it that he wanted to create a little Lego version of a ship that came for. I wanted to share that with you. You guys are awesome, and you know, I've always been open and authentic on the show, and I really appreciate it. And you guys are always here for the ride, so thank you for that. So, the books are available right now. If you haven't picked them up yet, go to mynerdworld.net. It is how you can support the show. Buy them for yourself or a friend. You can pick up the ebook for EMBARK is $2.99, and then the ebooks for Book 2, Treasure in Darkness, and Book 3, The Vanishing War, are $4.99. All 3 paperbacks are $13.99. And the audiobooks are available for Books 1 and 2, and I'm currently in the middle of working on the audiobook for Book 3 that'll be out probably the end of May, beginning of June. It's a long process, and I get that out about a month later. So if you want to support the show, go pick up a copy of the book for you or a friend. It would really go and help me out. I haven't been able to hit number 1 in my categories yet. That's okay. Basically, what it comes down to is I have to sell 44 copies in a day of one of the stories, and I could hit number 1 in the science fiction space opera category. But I haven't been able to achieve that yet. So if you'd like to help me out, and you haven't got your copy yet, go and pick up a copy for yourself or a friend. And you can gift it to a friend right there on the homepage on Amazon.com when you search for Jon Justice. But you can get to all that by going to mynerdworld.net. And 2 more things. 1, I need reviews. I need reviews in the really bad way. I've got a lot of great reviews. All the reviews have been great, but I've got a lot of reviews on EMBARK Book 1. I really need them for Treasure in Darkness. So if you're listening to this and you read Treasure in Darkness, even if you're not going to get The Vanishing War and you haven't gone to Amazon to leave a positive review, please do so. It would mean the world to me and really help me out. And certainly with The Vanishing War, please leave a review as soon as you can on Amazon.com. That'll really help me out. All right. Again, mynerdworld.net is where you need to go to purchase the books. And thank you, as always, for allowing me the opportunity on my show to promote my books. I'm really proud of how they turned out, and I couldn't be more thrilled with how people have responded to them so far. And that's it for this show this week. I hope you have a fantastic week. We'll be back next week, and we'll continue our rewatching. We're going to get into the original trilogy. How exciting is that? I can't wait. It's going to be so much fun. So until then, be healthy. Take care of yourself. Hug the individuals around you. Be safe, and may the Force be with you. Here's Obi-Wan Kenobi to tell you essentially the same thing. Have a great one. Bye.
The Force will be with you always.
My Nerd World.